everyone, and welcome to our program today. We're going to be talking about tobacco, past and present, in Pendleton County. We have with us today our guests. They are present and former tobacco growers here in the county. Tom Clifford, David, and Roy Maines will be talking with us on the topic of tobacco farming. Tom is the only one of the three who is currently farming tobacco. The other two fellows have many, many years together working farms and working in tobacco. Neither of them are currently raising tobacco. Just want to take a minute and thank these three gentlemen for taking their time to come and to talk to us about a dying industry. We're looking at a generation of folks who will have no clue what growing tobacco is all about or how important it was to the economy of this county. I also would like to take a minute here and point out that we will be showing photos of tobacco in various states of production. And we want to thank Tom Clifford for the bulk of those pictures. I have noted on the picture if it is someone's picture other than his, who it was, and I thank those people as well. Without them, we really couldn't give our viewers a good idea of what was going on. There are a few things in the video that I want to clarify before we start. One of those is Roy and I were talking about gassing tobacco beds. He mentioned your dad. He used that phrase, your dad. He was talking to me about my dad, but we never did mention my dad's name or why my dad was helping gas tobacco beds. My father was John Carr, one of the several here in Pendleton County, but he was John H. Carr, and he was a longtime farm machinery dealer, well over 30 years in the business here in Falmouth. And so as part of his business, he was running this machine and gassing beds. And I just wanted to kind of clarify who that was, because I know some of you will ask me. We also did not talk about growing in season or resetting plants. I searched and could not find anybody who had ever set in season. This is a picture of people setting in season. Setting in season simply meant you waited for rain to come, and when the soil was starting to dry out but wasn't too dry, wasn't too wet, you didn't run a risk of tramping the soil down and making it hard and packing it by walking on it. You would go out and set by hand. That's literally what they're doing. You see the gentleman in the background with the basket. He has plants in it, and he would drop them at intervals along the rows, and then the help would come along and plant those. I've got another picture of that maybe you can see a little better. She has, the lady in the front has tobacco in her hand, and she's dropping a plant in her other hand down for the guys to come along. They had what they called a tobacco peg, and they would use this little wooden peg to make a hole in the ground, or some people would use their finger and then put the plant in it and pack the dirt around it. Backbreaking work. So I did want to mention that. Resetting is something you would do. You could do it like they're doing this, or you could use a jobber. And that was usually done when maybe you got a late frost and it killed some of your tobacco. Maybe you got heavy rain, and then the sun came out and scalded and you lost tobacco that way. This was particularly done, I think, a lot when they were raising tobacco by the acre, because you didn't want to lose any of your tobacco because you were limited to the amount of acres you could raise. And then, they did it some later on, but I think eventually it got to the point they just put out extra tobacco to cover those minor losses. David Maines. They are brothers. Roy is on the left in the green plaid, and David has the blue shirt on. So we're going to start off, and you guys tell us how long you've been raising tobacco. Tell us, a little bit about yourselves. What was the biggest crop you ever had? Are you still growing tobacco? Go ahead.
Well, I'm 73 years old, and we have raised tobacco our entire life. So I grew up with tobacco. So when I actually say I grew my first crop is when I was big enough to walk to the field with my parents to be in the field. So well over 70 crops I have been old enough to remember, at least. So David's a little older, so he remembers more.
Yeah, I'm 80 years old now,
Okay.
and I haven't raised any for the last 10 years. I helped Roy a little.
I quit raising 5 years ago myself, actually, but I still have tobacco on my farm. We had 15 acres this year. My tenant is Petey Wright, so I'm still associated with tobacco if I don't actually grow it myself.
Okay.
So, and David and I, probably the largest crop we ever raised was around 140 acres. For several years, through the 70s and 80s and early 90s, we averaged about 100 acres a year. So,
Wow. And you sell that in pounds. So about how many pounds did that come out to?
well,
I know it depends on weather and everything else.
at one time we were raising over 3,000 pounds per acre. So if we had 100 acres a year, it would be 300,000 pounds. The most production I or David ever had on a year was one year we had a crop that made 4,000 pounds per acre.
Wow.
Which that was outstanding for this year time.
So what did you do that year that made it so big? Anything special, or was everything just?
Mother Nature cooperated. We got the rain when we needed it, the appropriate amount when we needed it, and no problem with disease or anything. It was just an outstanding growing year. The very next year, we talked about some of the diseases earlier that blue mold hit. It didn't average 1,000 pounds per acre, so that was one of the fungicide problems that we faced in the 80s and 90s. So.
Now, David, you two had farms together, didn't you?
Yes,
and then
for
you each
several
had
years.
several years. You operated as Maines brothers, I
Maines
think.
brothers.
Okay, so we
Yes.
wanted. What was your first job in tobacco? Did you remember? Probably following the setter.
Yeah, and not
Right?
too much. Handing up
Okay.
or picking up leaves.
Okay.
And of course, I went to cutting tobacco when I wasn't 8 or 10 years old.
Wow. Yeah. That's a big job for a little guy. Okay. I'd like you guys to kind of walk us through the process of growing tobacco. What's the steps? What do you do from seed till you take it to market? And kind of hit on how that's changed over the years, if you would.
Okay, in the earlier years, 40s and 50s, plant beds were prepared by what they call a burning process. And you took wood and things, and they had you could either just lay the logs on the tobacco beds, or they had a device, an iron pipe that they would pull through there and leave it on for a certain length of time and burn the beds. Normally the beds were 10 or 12 foot wide and normally 100 foot long. And after the beds were burned and cooled, the seeds were raw tobacco seeds, were mixed with ashes or fertilizer or something and scattered on the tobacco beds by hand. And if no one has actually ever saw a tobacco seed, they were measured in teaspoons. And a teaspoon of tobacco seed has well over 100,000 seed in it. So if you could imagine what process to be to spread evenly those small of seed. That's the reason they use the wood ashes or fertilizer or something to scatter it. And after they were scattered, and sometimes the beds were covered with straw, sometimes they were not, they had what they call a canvas, a cotton canvas. And our dad used to put logs around the beds and nails in the wood to hold the canvas up off of the actual ground. A lot of times they would use bottles or cans or something to put in there, where if you had a heavy rain or something, the snow would not get down and stick to the ground and actually pull the little plants out of the ground. They were so small and tiny. So, and a lot of times in earlier years, the seeding process would start out in February. That early, if the season would come, and normally it was done in March, even into late April, where you wanted to have the plants ready, big enough to start setting by the middle of May, the 1st of June for certain. So that time frame is kind of a general time figure, because our normal frost usually ends in late April, 1st of May, and then the killing frost in the fall, when you have to cut the tobacco, is usually the middle of October. So our growing season has a whole lot to do with when the plants were seeded and the tobacco was actually set in the ground. So
we pulled them plants by hand, of course, one at a time. Yeah, you didn't want them stuck together, so they get them in the setter and set them with the setter.
And when you pulled them, you put them in burlap sacks?
Bags or in a basket or something,
Mm-hmm.
so you can pick them up.
Now, David, do you remember when they started gassing beds
Yes,
instead of burning?
I was married. Let's see.
that was in the late 60s they actually started
actually,
gassing.
Ralph Wright
Okay.
gassed our bed. Year I had been decided, you still in high school.
Yeah, that was in 65.
Okay.
And but your dad actually had the machine. He's the one actually started the gassing business in this county, and he sold that machine to Ralph Wright.
Oh, okay.
Borlex or
Vorlex or something. I think it
Vorlex
was
machine.
Vorlex. I think it started with a V. Yeah.
And the gas came in canisters that resembled propane canisters,
Okay.
and usually 2 were put on the machine, and the plastic that covered the beds were mounted on the machine, and as the machine went through the bed, it sealed the sides so the gas would not escape. The gas was very toxic at the time,
Mm-hmm.
so you had to be
Nice.
real careful about that. And you
Now-
could also do it by hand. They had canisters that you could put 3 in a spot and puncture them with a nail under the plastic. So that process was where you had a small amount. Now, I think the largest number of beds we ever had in one particular year was like 5,000 feet. So that would have been, 44, 45 100-foot beds.
Now, did the gas, I know the purpose of doing gassing or burning beds was to get rid of the weeds.
Yes.
Right.
Now, did the gas damage the soil?
No, it did not.
Okay.
That same process is still used today
Okay.
in a lot of the bedding plants like tomatoes and things in the South. So that process is still, they use a different gas because the Borlex was outlawed.
Okay. Was it? Yeah.
So, but that process continues on.
I remember Dad saying one time about the machine, they told him he could not to use that more than 10 years because it could cause cancer. And he gave it up after 5.
Yes.
Yeah. He thought he didn't want to push it. That was what he always said. Okay. Then today we don't do beds anymore, correct? Or
Well,
some people still do beds.
The process transitioned
Mm-hmm.
in the late 70s. when the hydroponics actually came into being, and that's growing plants on water in what we're referred to today as greenhouses. And we control the environment of the greenhouse with heat and moisture, the things. And the plants at that time were, the tobacco seed was so small, they had to have a more commercialized version of how to seed a tobacco plant, a single plant in each cell of a styrofoam tray in those greenhouses. So that's when seeding companies, the one we used was what they call a bury seeding system, and they actually coated a tobacco seed with a fertilizer where it would fit in the cell of a plate that you use to transfer the plants to the cell in the greenhouse, in the styrofoam trays.
Okay.
And if you can imagine getting thousands and thousands of seed into a 1-inch square cell. So,
Yeah.
and they use vacuums and different processes to get the seed in the cell, but they were fertilizer coated because a tobacco seed is so small you can't hardly see it with the naked eye.
That's wild.
The process after that, controlling the temperature, the heat, the can't get too cold, too hot, and the ventilation system to keep the air moving so you don't get the airborne diseases and things that we had mentioned before, the different stuff that will hit it, the pathogenics, the plants, diseases. So that had to be more controlled with the spraying of chemicals and things.
Now, before you went to, they used to sell tobacco on acres, or you raised it on acres. Then you went to raising it based on pounds. When they sold it on acres, they measured tobacco.
Yes,
And your older brother,
Milton
measured tobacco.
measured tobacco.
What was that all about?
Well, actually, coming out of the 40s and 50s in the Burley Co-op and everything, to keep the tobacco on a more even basis as a grower, where they could control the production, where you didn't overproduce or underproduce the tobacco markets and things, had a controlled volume of the tobacco so they knew how much they would use, process, and sell in the year's time. So that's where the acreage came in. So to make it fair, they kind of went by a guideline of how much tendable ground you had, a kind of a history of the farms and things where you could grow, and they established bases for each farm. So it was kind of determined history-wise the amount of cropland that you actually had where you could grow a row crop and produce. So
Okay.
that was the basis of it.
Now, who set that standard?
That
Was that
was
the
a
Department of
government,
Agriculture?
well, the former ASC, Agricultural Stabilization, the government, the federal government, actually set those mandates.
Okay.
And control those mandates. So tobacco is actually the only program that was government controlled and subsidized for years.
Right. We're going to talk about that too in just a minute. Let's see. Then housing tobacco probably has not really changed a lot over the years, has it?
The process of cutting, well, first of all, the process of topping the tobacco.
Okay.
We top the tobacco, and now we have chemicals to control the suckers in the tobacco. And that brought in the first sprayers, hand sprayers, backpacks, and things, and then transitioned to highboys, mechanical sprayers that go over top of the tobacco. And in later years, they found out that you have to drop a tobacco stick in burley tobacco to cut the tobacco on. We used the highboys to drop sticks in the tobacco where it wouldn't tear up the tobacco quite as much as you would if you were carrying sticks through there by hand. Now in the earlier years,
Saved a lot of labor.
I can't
Yeah.
remember, they used to split tobacco. So I'm
Okay.
assuming sometime they would split the tobacco and then
The stalk, is that
straddle
what
a
you're saying?
streak, and they went to what they call a spear, which
Okay.
is the late 40s, early 50s, and actually speared the tobacco stalk on a stick. And so that caused less damage over the years.
Mhm.
And then the process of how long you left it in the field and things, and the newer style tobacco barns that we transitioned to, where they were wider and deeper, and the tobacco would cure better in the barn. So
Okay.
I racked my new barns off 5 foot. That way it didn't lap much and didn't have a lot of house burning.
Okay. I was going to ask about house burns. So the newer style, you have less
Well,
house burn.
the genetics of the tobacco has transitioned, changed so much over the year, where tobacco used to be 3.5 foot tall, 4 foot tall at the maximum,
Mhm.
and now tobacco is 7 feet tall, even 8 feet tall in some cases.
Right.
So, and the actual plant itself, the progress of genetics and engineering and research, we grow a longer, deeper, heavier bodied leaf. So that part has changed over through research, same as any other ag product.
Now, the University of Kentucky had several ag experimental stations around. Were there any in Pendleton County that did tobacco that you ever
Not
remember?
that I know of.
Okay.
There was Owen County,
Owen. Okay.
Eden Shell in Owen County. Now
Okay.
they were mainly livestock, but I think they may have grown tobacco at one time as research. Most of the
Okay.
UK research farms dabbled into a little bit of everything in their earlier years.
Right.
So
Okay. So David, talk about problems that you have in the field with tobacco, like when you house tobacco and it's maybe it's a cold winter, or do you get disease in your, I guess, in your tobacco after you cut it and hang it? Is
Yes.
that possible?
yes,
The blue mold will keep on working. And
Okay.
of course, if it's cold and windy, it'll green it, turn it green. And
And those are bad things?
yeah, and if it's rainy, muggy, we get a lot of house burn.
the humidity.
Yeah.
You
Okay.
have to have the proper amount of humidity to cure the tobacco, but not so much that it rots, or so little that the tobacco dehydrates and doesn't. Going through the curing process, you go in and out of what they refer to as case.
Right.
Case, the tobacco takes on moisture and then dries back out. Takes on moisture and dries back out.
Yeah, to our listeners who aren't familiar with that, it's like cereal. When you open a cereal box and you set it up in your cabinet and you get it out and it's soggy,
It
that's
picks
in
up
case.
moisture and humidity. That's case.
Yeah, that's right. That's something I think everybody can
A lot
understand.
of the older people will refer to in keeping order.
Okay,
So case or in keeping order is essentially the same thing.
okay. And I know you and I talked because I asked you about using Coke to dry out tobacco.
Uh,
So there were other, throughout time, UK has issued, I guess, ideas on how to process your tobacco, and one of them that I ran across in the newspaper was that they were using a byproduct of coal called coke in heaters to keep the tobacco from freezing in the barn.
Coke, if nobody is actually familiar with it, is a form of charcoal. It's just
Okay.
similar to what you would use on your charcoal grill if you're grilling out. A lot of people use charcoal grills, and they would have these stoves, as they were referred to, and set several around in the barn in different places. And these coke stoves, they would have to be tended 24 hours a day to actually keep from starting a fire. So you could burn a lot of tobacco barns down if they got too hot and they had to be controlled more.
Did your
Well-
dad ever do that?
No, my dad didn't, but the farm that I bought, the Sonny Wilson farm, the coke stoves were still there. And
Okay.
he had gas burners, which I did use gas for curing.
Yeah. In later years, they used commercial bottled gas,
Mhm.
LP gas, and a small gas burner that they could put under the tobacco and put baskets around them and control them. And they were a little more stable than using coke. They were still a fire, and you still had to watch for fire hazards and things.
Right.
So,
Did they do that very long?
No.
because the price of
Gas.
bottled gas got it up.
Got so high it couldn't,
Right.
you'd spend your whole crop.
Yeah.
It would empty a 300-gallon tank in about 3 days.
Wow.
As many burners as that I had.
You know, at the time, if bottled gas was 18, 19 cents a gallon as compared to now, where it's in the $3 range for
Right.
bottled gas. So,
Yeah. So what do you do now?
I'm retired.
I mean, you don't do anything in tobacco then, huh?
No,
But I mean, what do you do now to keep your tobacco from freezing in the barn? Do we do anything?
we actually don't do anything to keep it from freezing
Okay.
because that's Mother Nature.
Okay.
Now, as far as the ventilation and things, you start cutting earlier and use barns that are racked, like David referred to earlier, wider and deeper, where the tobacco cures out quicker, and we normally start cutting earlier than we did. Our climate has changed a whole lot, where we don't have the early freezes as we used to in years past. And so you cure the tobacco down a little faster and things. And then we still use barns with the shutters and doors and things where you can actually close it up and protect it from the cooler temperatures.
Okay. Did you all ever get out of school to cut tobacco?
Yes. About the first 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
At that time, we never started to school till after the tobacco crop was in.
Okay.
If I remember right, typically school didn't start till after Labor Day, well
Right.
up into the middle of September. And if you were on a farm cutting tobacco or whatever, you didn't start the school till after the crop was in. And a lot of times that could be well up into October. So, and at the time, you weren't counted absent
Right.
or tardy or
Truant or
anything
anything,
till
yeah.
you enrolled the first day of school.
Mm-hmm. And then it was an excused absence, I think.
Yes,
Mhm.
but you weren't counted absent at all. If you took off days after you had enrolled, it was a
Right.
excused absence.
By the time I got to high school, we were going in August to school. And yeah, boys used to cut out early to go work in tobacco or take days off.
Now,
Yeah.
when you first day of school, if you're of school age and you're not enrolled in school, the truant officers want to know why you are not in school.
Right.
And the parents are held accountable.
Right. But back
Oh.
then, tobacco was very important to the whole community, really.
Well, tobacco was probably the number one economic in the county, probably, and then dairy and then the beef cattle and things followed.
Right.
Actually, we didn't get into grain till way up in the late 60s and early 70s.
Okay. Stripping tobacco. You just strip it in grades?
Yes, we still 3 grades mostly.
Okay. And what are those three?
Trash and lug and red.
Okay. Where do you find the trash on the stalk and the
On the
lug?
bottom of the stalk where you cut it off. And then what I call lugs is in the middle of the stalk, and the red would be on the top.
And some people call red tips, right?
Now they refer to it as flangs,
Okay.
the middle or bodied tobacco, and the tips are the tips, the red tobacco.
Okay.
The redder
Bud, I
and
think
darker
they
the
call it
tobacco
bud.
with the more nicotine content, the more valuable it is today.
Okay.
Of course, we first started, we hand tied the tobacco for 20 years probably, raising it. And then we made the smaller bales, 100-pound ones. In the last 10 or 15 years, we made 600-700 pound ones.
Talk about how you tied tied hands.
Yes. You would get you a good solid leaf with a little moisture in it and just tie it like you would a handkerchief and
Okay.
tuck it in.
And about how much tobacco? It was a handful of tobacco
Yeah,
that
a
you
hand-
tied
What a
together?
normal person would be a hand,
Okay.
what you could wrap your hand around. Referred something like to a soft drink bottle these days, what you could hold in your hand
Okay.
and not be too big or large. We used hand presses at the time, and normally a 12 to 14 hands of tobacco on a stick, and then press it. So
And then how did you get that to market in hands? Because it was probably smaller than
stick.
your bales. You
No,
took it on the
you
stick.
took it
stayed
on
on
the
the
stick.
stick.
Okay.
You take it to the warehouse and sort it and pack it on the baskets.
Okay. So that was labor intensive too.
Very
then.
labor intensive.
And you were talking about picking up leaves. You want to talk about that? Picking up
Well,
leaves when you
that-
house? What did you do with them?
When we were younger, you picked up every leaf, you tried to save it, and now they don't even pick up none. They just raise another acre or something.
And when you picked up those leaves, you took them into the barn to cure.
Right, you had to lay them out on some straw or boards or something where they get some air.
And then
around.
you stripped it right along with the rest of your tobacco, or
Yeah, picked
tied
up-
it in hands, whatever.
Yes.
Well, we did prime tobacco at one time. Go
Talk
through the
about
field
that.
and pulled off the bottom leaves and things and tuck them
Mhm.
through the barn to keep before they would rot and fall off or be damaged in the field. And they would do similar to hands and put rubber bands around it or something, then drape it over a stick and hang it up in the barn like we would the normal tobacco on the stalk.
And I have a picture of them priming tobacco that I'm going to insert in here too.
in different other areas or whatever, they used to twine and would intertwine the top of the sleeves or sew it and then hang it up on the strip. That was more done so in the South, where they actually primed the whole crop before they went into priming machines.
Okay.
So, and down south now in the flue cure, they have machines that go through the field and strip the leaves off and put it in just baskets or whatever to cure it in curing barns. That was tried in Kentucky for a while, but it just didn't work with burley tobacco. The tobacco didn't cure. We didn't get that air cured quality.
Right.
So
And we're talking about machinery, stripping tobacco. You and I talked about this the other day. Tobacco strippers.
they in the late 70s and early 80s, they researched with machines that would pull the leaf off of the stalk, and that really did not work because it didn't. You couldn't get the grading process. The leaves would be mixed and things, but they had machines that they would actually strip the leaves off of the stalk and just more or less drape them or fall them into a pile or something. The different ways of doing that, different machines and things. And so, but you still had to feed the stalk into the machine one stalk at a time by hand. So a good fast hand stripper was actually as faster than the machines ever turned out to be.
So
Sometimes it happens.
wasn't
It wasn't very helpful here.
no, it wasn't helpful. Didn't
Well,
work.
you didn't get the quality of leaf. It tore the leaves and things up, which the tobacco companies did not want,
Right.
which is kind of hard to understand in a way if you've ever been to a tobacco processing cigarette company as to how they handle it.
Yeah. So then selling tobacco, that's changed a whole lot since you all were kids.
Uh,
Tell me about that.
We used to would take it to the market, and they had a buyer come in and he'd bid on it, auctioned it off. And if you didn't like what you got for it, you could reject it, but most generally we sold it.
Well, that was at the time we had government graders and
Grader.
government support price.
Okay,
Now we don't have that.
right,
The guy just tells you what he would give you for it.
and you take it or leave
He'll
it.
either take it or take your tobacco home.
Mhm.
And you can't eat tobacco, so
In those earlier years on the hand packing, hand process, each warehouse, and at one time there was 16 warehouses in Cynthiana where we used to sell tobacco, and they would sell an entire capacity of a warehouse at one time before they would move on to the next one. And so some of the larger warehouses and things, it got to be an unfair competition because they could sell 3, 4, 5 times as much poundage as a smaller warehouse. So they went to drawing for placement or allotments and rotated each year. And as that worked for a while, but still though the warehouses, the larger ones as opposed to the smaller ones, what they call floor capacity, they went to using a poundage allotment for the warehouse where they could only sell so much percent of their floor space each year, which was a more fair competition for the people that were actually managing the warehouses.
Right.
And so it rotated more, and each warehouse got a crop where they could sell more often, more fair on the marketing end.
Okay, you mentioned government graders. What did they do?
The government graders, which goes back to the Burley Co-op years and things, the government was a federally funded project to support the price of tobacco. That's where our government graders come in. They put a government, what they call a base price on the tobacco. And then if the buyers wanted that, they paid that or more. If it did not bring that amount up to the government grade, it went into what they call the Burley Pool or Burley Co-op. So that's where the pool came in.
Talk about the pool.
The pool was established, like we talked before, in the late 30s and early 40s, I actually believe. And that was a government-funded project. Government controlled the thing.
So the government basically bought your tobacco if you weren't satisfied with the price. Then what did they do with that
If
tobacco?
that tobacco was processed and went into storage, and then as the tobacco companies would need that tobacco later in the year, sometimes years later, they paid for the government support price plus the processing and the storage fees, and then a profit over and above that. So that's where the pool came in.
the government made money,
Yeah, the government definitely made money.
made a lot of money.
And then the government got out of the pool. What happened there?
Yeah.
Well, anti-smoking Senate
Brown and Williamson
and things,
versus
so
whatever.
all the other, said, well, it's not right that tobacco is the only federally subsidized crop. So there was just a lot of dissent over the program itself over the years. And so it pretty much went by the wayside.
Okay. Took them a long time to get it there, though.
It did. The anti-smoking, the environmentalists, and everything, the cancer-related things, all attributed to the downfall of tobacco.
Let's see. I think we've covered pretty good. What's the biggest problem you had in raising tobacco?
Labor.
Yeah.
Labor was the number one problem, because it's labor intensive. Everything is done by hand, and we just don't have that labor force available anymore. Now, whether you contributed to society, the hard work, government, whatever, we just don't have the labor availability. And so after the labor source and everything is when we went into the the Mexican labor. So the itinerant farmers and things,
Migrant workers.
migrant workers.
I had a house trailer fixed up for my boys, and at some years we had as many as 10, I guess, didn't we?
We've had more than that in past years. I've had as
No,
high as 30.
That was ours, so.
But 23 was the most I ever had.
Most you
that-
had,
that I have.
But you all together,
Yes,
on your farms, you owned together, you had
Yeah.
10, you think?
But in later years, I had 23.
Wow. And do you get that many now? I'm hearing you
You
don't.
can, but it's so expensive to
Yeah.
get them here, and then you have to have they have to be proper housing. Housing authority has to go through inspection and inspect their living quarters. You have to have so many square feet per person of living space. Kitchens, baths, water, everything has to be government approved.
And this is what they call the H1N1?
H2A.
H2A, okay.
H2A.
I was thinking
H2A
blue.
It's guest labor. Now
Okay.
the H1A is a person that comes here for, to take up citizenship and things. That's a different program altogether.
Okay.
And then there are different other H2, 3As and 4A programs and things where they come for different reasons and different jobs and things. There's different rules and regulations that pertain to those.
you know what the boys have to pay now?
Minority labor right now is $13.95, somewhere in that neighborhood. Just as well say around
An hour.
$15 per hour.
Wow.
Plus you have to pay work visas to get them here, where they go through the embassies on Mexico and on the United States embassies to make sure they're not some kind of terrorist or something. They have to have
Mhm.
background checks and criminal checks and everything in both the Hispanic countries and the America. I have heard a lot of, not necessarily tobacco, but other migrant laborers are coming out of Germany, South Africa, different places in the world that are more specialized. There are different needs in labor. So,
Okay. Interesting. So was Mexico the only country that you had workers from at that time?
no,
No, it's,
Cuba
Did you?
actually had the Guam, Puerto Rico.
Okay.
Now they may have arrived through the Mexican, but we had
Okay.
Cubans, and Puerto Ricans.
Haitians.
Haitians. Okay.
Actually, there was some South Africans. We didn't have any ourselves, but there were South Africans in Kentucky for a while.
Okay. And tobacco.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay. Anything that we've not talked about that you all think people need to know? Because tobacco is not what it used to be, to say the least. You used to drive down the road and it was on both sides of the road, the whole road, every road in the county. And you just don't see it like that anymore. So we're raising a generation of people that have no idea of what raising tobacco is about. So
Probably what, 8 or 10 tobacco farmers
Yeah.
in the county.
Society itself has deemed tobacco an evil tyrant that's taken over, which is not true by any means. Tobacco usage is, I would say, attributed to most anything else you do in life. It's the excessive amount, abuse, or how you actually use it. It's the same way with eating food or whatever you do in life. Drinking, alcohol, whatever, drugs. Drugs is a big thing. That might be one of our bigger problems in the tobacco industry today is drugs. that
Really?
leads to drug abuse, that people don't want to work, can't work, won't work,
Or not safe to have them working.
and not safe to
Mhm.
have them working.
Right,
So,
Yeah.
drugs is another factor.
sure. So anything you want people to know about raising tobacco that we've not covered?
Don't start.
And why is that?
Well, you'd have to have $1 million worth of machinery.
Yeah, the cost of machinery has really gone up, hasn't it?
Outrageous.
Mhm.
It's went from a factory, well, a family farm oriented business to a factory assembly line factory, whatever to speak, that has taken over. There's no such thing hardly as a family farm anymore.
Right, it's more of a corporate farm
It's
or a
corporate
big,
farms
big farming.
And big farming, big money.
Okay. Well, we thank you guys for coming in today and talking to us. It's been really
You're
interesting, a lot
welcome.
of fun.
Yeah.
We are sitting here today right now with Tom Clifford of Falmouth, Kentucky, and Tom raises a large amount of tobacco here in the county and has for a long time. About how much are you raising, Tom, this year?
So in margin of 40 to 50 acres.
Okay. And how will that translate into poundage?
If it makes 2,000 pounds the acre anymore, we're flying. So
Okay, so that's good. Okay. So when the tobacco buyout came about in I guess it was the 90s maybe, how did that change to how you grow tobacco?
in a short word, it created an open market, so to speak.
Okay.
It was it turned it more into a volume enterprise as opposed to quality.
Okay. So basically, it was more important to raise more pounds rather than good tobacco.
It had to be good in a sense, but volume was necessary in order to have a margin on the back end of things.
Okay.
And then we had that little buyout check that come annually.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us choose to use that to subsidize what we were short on margin wise, and
Okay.
could
And by
expand.
margin wise, we're meaning profit for our
Right.
audience, right? Okay. So you took the buyout then? Did you-
everybody did, I believe.
Everybody, okay. I didn't know if you had to do that. We're going to find out a little more about that maybe as
Prior
we
to
get
that,
through
we
it, but-
operated on a marketing card. We was allotted so many pounds,
Right.
poundage to sell.
Now, tell me about the marketing card. How did you get it? What did it? How did they determine how many pounds everybody could sell? And how did you use that marketing card to sell your product?
At one time, maybe in the 50s or so forth, you was allowed so many acres, and then it turned that into so many pound per farm, every farm having a farm number.
Okay.
And with the poundage allocation to each farm, you come with a marketing card, and that was like based on the company's buying intentions. You was allotted so many pounds that you was allowed to sell off of that particular farm. And then with that, they had you could lease in pounds from farms that people didn't necessarily want to raise theirs. And it came with a limit of, like, you could lease in as much as 30,000 pounds on any particular farm at the time.
Okay. And then was there a cap on the total number of pounds you could lease in? Not just pounds per farm, but total amount? No, so you could lease in.
15 farms and 15 marketing cards.
Okay. Okay, so as long as you had a card, you could sell your tobacco then.
Yeah.
Okay. What happened if you didn't have enough? Say your card was for 1,000 pounds, and you had 500 pounds. Was that okay?
You come up short on your crop, what you produced. It was what it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you could still sell your 500 pounds.
So yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Then did that other additional 500 pounds carry over to the next year?
Generally did.
Okay.
And there might even been opportunity at times where you could lease in at the fall, at the end of the year kind of thing, when you seen that you was short. Seemed to me like there was opportunity that you could do that.
Then if you were over on pounds, say your card had 1,000 pounds on it and you still raised 1,200, what did you do with that other 200 pounds?
Played into what I just said. You could,
Okay. You could lease
as long
in
as there was
base. and-
paperwork that went along with it at the ASC office.
Okay.
If I remember right, those little boxes on the back of that card where you could add to, or but they processed all that at the ASC office.
Okay, so there was still a possibility you could get that sold. And if you didn't get it sold, did you just hold it over to the next year, the tobacco itself?
Yeah, I don't think that happened very often. But
Okay, but in theory, it could have happened.
yeah,
Okay. So then, when you got the buyout, you were still able to go ahead and raise tobacco while getting the buyout?
yeah.
Okay. While you were getting the buyout money and while you were raising tobacco, was it still being sold on pounds?
Right.
Okay.
Contract pounds now.
Contract pounds. Explain contract pounds.
Oh my goodness. Your companies, I won't name any, but they offer you similar to the marketing card. They offer you so much poundage, what your selling intentions are.
And their buying intention.
Yeah. Of course, I guess to keep it somewhat workable in between how much is produced and how much they plan on buying.
Okay. And you actually sign this contract and you take it.
It's kind of, for lack of a better word, it's probably non-explicit where this is what you intend to do, but if it falls through, there's not really a sense of liability.
Okay. Okay, so you're not penalized then for not having your poundage.
Not in the tangible sense, it don't seem like.
Okay.
But everybody tries to produce if they're into it.
Well,
so.
sure. Is it easier this way? Was it easier when you had the marketing card and the pounds? Did you get better money then? How's it working out?
I believe, was better money then. Like I say, we're operating on volume, and now with the way things are, the overhead is just ridiculous. So
Talk
you
about.
work a whole lot more for a whole lot less.
Okay. So how has your
Like anything,
overhead?
though.
How has your overhead changed then?
It's got astronomical.
Just the price wise?
The price hasn't increased in any significant measure, but the overhead's gotten
But the overhead.
ridiculous.
So what you're paying for labor and what you're paying for seed, and that's what's gone up.
Fertilize and labor especially, yeah.
Okay.
If the labor's even available.
Okay. And what do you do about that?
When the buyout first came and we jumped into the volumes mentality, and it was the 90s, we had migrant workers. I had an influx of migrant workers came, and we was kind of flying pretty good, it seemed like. And that must have been in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And then that waned away. The labor, I don't know, it's a struggle anymore.
Really? So when you were in high school, I'm betting you hired out to other people to work in tobacco as well as your own family, didn't you?
In high school, everybody seemed like that's what put gas in our cars when we was 16 years old,
Sure. And bought those cars.
right?
So how has raising tobacco then, okay, so now you've got a shortage of labor. When you were in high school, there was no shortage of labor to speak of.
We tried
And
to outwork one another.
Yeah, to get hired by the best paying person, right?
Or it was just a matter of integrity or something, I don't know.
Yeah, true. So what does person, you pay, how do you pay somebody who's cutting tobacco for you? You pay them by the stick?
By the stick or the piece, yeah.
Okay. How much has that changed over the years? What did you get as a high school kid versus what
It's
you're paying now?
doubled.
It's doubled, okay. How many sticks a day can a good cutter cut?
It depends on how good a job they're doing. And how hungry they are
For the money?
for the money. I don't know, we had a saying 1,000 sticks a day, I don't know.
Yeah.
I've seen more and I've seen less. And usually the ones that cut a few less are the ones doing a better job, which pays off more in the other end because it handles better.
Okay.
It's not tore up as much. And
Now, for somebody who's watching this and they've never worked in tobacco before, kind of walk them through how you house tobacco today. Has that changed for you?
not
Not so much for
necessarily. A little less particular, and like I say, we're operating on a volume sense more so than.
When they used to be, when they housed in the field, when they were loading it, they just put it on a wagon. You just stacked it up on the wagon. Now I've seen these, I don't know what you call them, that they actually like hang the tobacco sticks on these bars.
Probably termed as pipe wagons.
Is that what that's called?
Probably.
Okay. Do we see many of those in Pendleton County?
There was a spell that there was a few around, more so. They're more practical in the driveways in the barn in a sense. I don't know so much as they got benefits or anything, but they've been used. There's been some around.
Some of those.
It was one of them ideals that materialized for a little while, then kind of went away.
And that's happened a lot with tobacco for the years.
Some things that went on to improvement, some things went
Yeah.
the other way.
So you do hydroponic plants now?
With greenhouse or flow bed plants or water plants, we call them, yeah.
Okay. And that's a whole lot different than when you were in high school and you did plants.
Full bed plants, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
An all-day job and just sit 2 hours sometimes, right? So do you like doing the hydroponic plants better? Is it easier? Is it more efficient? Is it,
fishing, cost effect because you can move a little faster, but there's some downsides where if you have a disease issue, it runs rampant in just a little while.
in the hothouse?
Yeah. There's the initial cost of it's kind of up there, and it's cost that goes along with that overhead.
Right.
We used to gas and seed 100-foot bed of bed plants, and it was like you could just about figure that would be $100 in cost and material. Now, the water plants is probably upwards of $350, $400 an acre for the water bed plants, but they're already pulled and ready to set.
Sure.
There's a little bit of trade-off there.
It cuts down on your labor if you have to
Definitely
hire
the
someone.
labor aspect of things.
On that end, now, it's probably more labor intensive getting it ready though. So does it
It
come out
doesn't take
maybe?
as long. Yeah.
Okay. You want to walk us through how you raise those water plants? How do you start until you get them ready?
There's float trays, which Well, you're seeding in trays. The seeder itself is, well, the seeds are coated. They're like little tiny BBs, and you roll them out on a tray. And you turn on a vacuum, and it'll suck them seeds into a little dibble, and then you can turn your seeder upside down, and it'll release the seeds onto the tray.
Okay.
And somebody real good at seeding can seed 100 trays an hour or something.
Oh, wow.
So that's pretty efficient.
Mm-hmm. And then you have to transplant those as they get bigger, right?
No, well,
Into-
we did that at one time. We called them plugs, and they went
Okay.
into a larger tray. But
Okay.
a whole lot of it's direct seeded now. That's
Okay.
what we're turning.
So that cuts out that step and makes it more efficient too, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you have a disease issue or a bad
Right.
stand, or you'll have a tray that's only got.
So what do you do if you have a disease issue? Is there any way to stop it, or do you just start
Depends on what
over?
it is. It usually has to do with a fungicide remedy where they rot.
Okay.
Or of course, there's plenty of chemicals available to throw your money at to try to doctor it along the way. But we don't. The weather's a big contingency on how they respond. They're so dense in that any little thing moving through there will cause them to rot or whatever if you're not careful.
Okay. So,
We got better at it over the years. I've
Well, yeah.
lost whole greenhouses before, but typically don't. It could happen, but typically it ain't happening again.
okay. How long does it take you to set 40 to 50 acres?
But we got 2 row setters and decent help and rolling along all day. 6 acres is pretty good for my outfit.
6 acres a day?
That's 2 rows at a time, 6 acre day,
Okay.
7 maybe 5, depends on what we get into. It's not a big job, it's just a matter of timing when to get on it. As opposed to what it used to be, like you say, we had to pull plants, and that took people pulling plants and people riding the setter and so
Following the
forth, working
setter.
ground ahead of the tractor and so forth. It
Yeah.
took a little longer, but
Now, do you still work the ground ahead of the tractor the same, or has that changed too?
it's a little more particular with these plants, but basically it's the same.
Okay, so that hasn't really changed. I didn't know if maybe it had gotten easier to just put them in the ground. And, you
Well,
know,
it's another one case where everything's working right, it's good. If you got one little issue, it can set you back where it becomes challenging.
okay.
We don't know. We don't know our way around things as much as we're learning quite a bit, but it don't come without its challenges.
So what is your biggest challenge, would you say?
Having a margin on the back end, the overhead,
Okay.
there's the labor issues and the cost of production.
Do you irrigate?
Not as much as we once did. That was a big thing at one time. Now we try to not to. Like, it cuts into that overhead,
Okay.
and you got the way we do things now. You got that your operation window when you got a set is more idyllic than it was back when we had to pull bed plants and it was an ongoing. We did a little bit. It took a long time to get to the span of things, and we might be setting tobacco at the very end of June and July, and the dry period would have to water. A whole lot of plants, tobacco gets set in May.
Okay. That's what I was
Nowadays.
gonna ask.
You got a more reasonable growing period generally. With burley tobacco, too much rain is way worse than not enough, even if you don't get to irrigate. So
Okay. And why is that?
it's a dry weather crop. I think it
Okay.
has to do a whole lot with that disease factor,
Okay.
soil-borne diseases, and then we had a big thing of blue mold at one time that moved into the country every wet spring or so forth, and tobacco would just disappear off the plant.
So it just kind of rotted off the plant?
Yeah.
And then can you still sell that tobacco or no?
You get to work harder for less, most definitely.
Okay.
Yeah. You'll do better with a good crop than you ever will a bad crop.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably so. Anything else that you think somebody ought to know about raising tobacco today? Obviously, you like doing it because you're still doing it.
I don't know if that's so much. It'd be the only thing. It's really the only thing around locally that. If I wasn't already there, I wouldn't think even about getting into it. But we come to in a particular era where that was everybody's conversation when they met up with anybody on the street or whatever. How's your crop doing? It's just been a lingering thing. Being put in that position, that's what I know, and it's all intuitive anymore. And I intuitively know it's not the greatest thing anymore, but that's where we're at.
Right. Well, it used to be, the big money maker.
Oh,
That's
my goodness.
everybody, even the economy of the businesses in town were dependent on a good tobacco crop
That's
from the
absolutely
farmers.
right. Yeah.
Is that still in play as much?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
There's a lingering handful of us growers in the county, I believe.
Yeah.
Right off the top of my head, I can only think of a handful presently.
You used to drive down the road and you could see it everywhere, and you don't anymore.
Everybody.
So these tobacco companies who are buying it, are they making less cigarettes? Are they not getting as much
Most
tobacco?
definitely.
Okay, well, we thank you very much, Tom, for joining us today and sharing with us this lost, it's really just kind of a lost thing anymore, lost art.
Vocation or whatever you want to